Thank you for being with us today, Joel.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. You just crushed my intro, so now I don't even feel like I need to do one. Just kidding. Yeah, so as Jake said, my name is Joel Kaskinen. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Community Engagement Manager for Lost and Found, which is a suicide prevention nonprofit located here in Sioux Falls, that's serving the entire state of South Dakota from Spearfish over to the east side of the state here in Sioux Falls, Vermilion area, and then additionally expanding into the Minnesota region, so the Twin Cities region specifically, and then we are also trying to expand into Duluth, St. Cloud, and Mankato. So in the next couple of years, we have hopes to expand further into Minnesota, and hopefully after that into North Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, etc. But we've got big dreams, we've got big goals, but right now we're just in Minnesota and South Dakota. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen for the presentation and give a further introduction to you all about the organization as a whole. And then we'll jump right into the mental health content specifically geared towards youth resiliency. Okay. So welcome again. This is our presentation on youth resiliency from Lost and Found. So let's talk about Lost and Found to begin. So like I said, we are a Sioux Falls-based nonprofit organization, and we partner with college campuses specifically in South Dakota and Minnesota. And we are working to get into the K-12 systems as well. So starting next fall, we'll be in the Sioux Falls School District, and possibly the Rapid City area school district as well. But we are looking to expand into the younger demographic, as we know that suicide is one of the leading causes of deaths for young people in America, and suicide is the leading cause of death for youth and young adults in the state of South Dakota. So we are looking to expand into the K-12 area. We provide 3 student programs to all of the college campuses that we serve, and then we will be adapting these programs to the K-12 spaces. So those programs are the peer-to-peer mentorship program, which assigns older upperclassmen students on college campuses to incoming students on a voluntary basis. So if there's a first-year student or a transfer student or a non-traditional student or an international student who wants to receive some additional support in their transition to college, they will be assigned with one of our peer-to-peer mentors. Those students not only help with the transition to campus life, but also with the mental health aspects that come with that transitory state. Lost and Found Advocates is honestly what I call our pillar program. I don't know if the rest of the staff considers it that way, but this program is very kind of pinnacle to who we are. We train cohorts of students across college campuses that we serve to be mental health advocates. So we teach them coping skills, resilience building, capacity building. So thinking of like, how can they focus on themselves to better pour into others? So how do we, make sure that we have the capacity to provide the support that is needed to go to others that we love? And then in addition to that, we also train them in how to respond to crises as needed and how to advocate for themselves for others in a mental health scenario. So if they recognize that friends or family were struggling with mental health in any capacity, they would know how to have those conversations, how to refer to different support structures, and how to get the appropriate help that is needed. Our campus chapters are our original kind of flagship model of Lost and Found. We actually started our organization as a registered student organization at the University of South Dakota 12 years ago. And from there, we have adopted into a campus chapter model. And so each of the campuses that we serve has a campus chapter model, and those campus chapters serve as the social programming board for our students. So they do things like pet the pups during finals week. They do things like yoga night, or they host 5Ks or Zumba classes, things like that. It's focused more on the social element of creating connections to help bridge those gaps with mental health struggles. And then they also work to provide guidance and support to the peer-to-peer mentors and lost and found advocates. So if those students need some help connecting the students that they're working with in those programs, they send them to the campus chapters for that social element. I've listed our website and social media here. Everything is resilient today. As part of my role as community engagement manager, I do all of our social media, I do all of our website work, I do anything that's kind of public facing. So if you ever need to reach out to anything, I'm usually the one that is responding to those things on social media and on our website, like a contact inquiry page. So I listed those so that way you could reach out to me at any point. Our service map. So like I said, we serve everywhere from Spearfish to the Twin Cities region. So this kind of outlines what that looks like. Each of the different ampersands, which is our logo, as you can see, it's lost. It makes an L and an F into the shape of an ampersand. So we incorporated our name into our logo, but each different color represents a different service that we provide to a different campus or community. So we have the orange is just student programs on those campuses or in those communities. Evaluation services is yellow, education and advocacy is blue. Postvention, for those of you unfamiliar with that term, it means providing support to families who have lost a loved one to suicide. So it's kind of the after prevention. So those are green. And then any area that has multiple programs. So maybe it has a student program and education and advocacy, or evaluation and postvention, but anywhere with multiple programs is the black. So that's kind of our service map. And then before we get into like mental health and what is mental health and how to help the students that you work with and the youth that you work with, I always find that it's important to share statistics, because statistics in combination with stories are what makes people feel that they can act. You know, they feel that they're less alone if they see the statistics, because the statistics are very large. They are alarming, especially in our state. And the stories that people share in combination with these statistics are what is going to help us to reach further and to get more people to talk about mental health and provide services and resources. So I always start with the statistics. So why is it important? 1 in 5 US adults experiences mental illness, 1 in 20 US adults experiences a serious mental illness, and 17% of youth have a mental health disorder. That is from NAMI, so the National Association for Mental Illness. That came from them. This is actually a little bit of old data. This came from 2020, so I actually need to replace this one. These numbers have increased slightly since the pandemic, and so these numbers are a little outdated, but this is, I just really like this graph. I think it paints a picture really well to show that it's widespread. Because we work specifically with college students, I always like to include a graphic like this. So 46% of college students reported having symptoms of depression and anxiety. So if you look at that, or 44, not 46, excuse me. If you look at that, like out of 100 people, I mean, that's almost half of college students today reporting they're struggling with mental health. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for college students. I actually giving a little bit of self-disclosure and personal story as to why I started working in the suicide prevention space. I actually used to work in higher education supporting college students. And in my final year working in education, I lost 3 students to suicide in 1 calendar year. So the fact that suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for college students hits very close to home for me. And that's really why I like to share this graphic. I'm not going to go into all of these different statistics just because there's a lot of them, but I think that it does really help you to understand that when your youth that you work with today move into the college space, the challenges that they are going to be up against. And when they get to be that age, that transitory age of moving into adulthood from childhood, they're going to face different challenges, and these statistics are important to note as they get older. I love sharing local data because I think that when we work with nonprofits, so myself, you all, the reason we do so is because we want to give back to our home communities, the hometowns that we live in, and the people that we care about who are living next door to us or shopping in the grocery store next to us. So I always find it very important to point out the local statistics. So for us, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in South Dakota, but is the leading cause of death among ages 10 to 19 in 2021. That actually has changed from 10 to 29 in the last year and a half. So the statistics have just slightly shifted, making that age range slightly larger. South Dakota had the 7th highest rate of suicide in the United States in 2021, and there was 202 deaths by suicide in the state in that same year. That was a record year for the state of South Dakota. We've never reached over 200 before, and we had 202 deaths. So an important thing to note on that statistic specifically is that in the last 5 years, we've increased slightly every year. So we went from 190 to 194 to 196 to 198 to 202. And so we've kind of been on this steady incline, and we're really trying to plateau because we don't want to see more than 200 deaths by suicide in a calendar year. So it's really important that we note that, just because the 2022 statistics are still being calculated. All of this data, by the way, comes from the CDC and the South Dakota Department of Health. So that's where I receive all of my data. But like I said, we're trying to keep that plateau, or we're trying to keep these numbers at a plateau rather than a rise. Another thing that's important that I like to note, because we do have a very high population of American Indians and Native Americans, the rate for suicide for them is 2.6 times higher than their white counterparts. So I just always like to share that because we see barriers to access for mental health care within those populations. You know, the reservations, they operate not out of the federal government or the state government, and so they have some slightly different challenges when finding and receiving care. In 2021, 21.5% of South Dakota high school students considered suicide, and 11.9% of South Dakota high school students attempted suicide. So for the students that you work with, that's alarming numbers, 21.5 and 11.9%. You know, think of the numbers of students that you see every day, and, you know, just think of that percentage of those people that you're trying to work with and support. So really alarming numbers, really alarming statistics, but it's the work that you all do, it's the work that I do that helps us combat this. Suicide, like I said, is the leading cause of death now for 10 to 29-year-olds, not just 10 to 19-year-olds. 581 lives have been lost to suicide since 2012, so for the 10-year kind of mark that we're at. And then just reiterating that 21.5% of high school students. A lot of this is just re-articulating that same data. I want to point out that 42% of all suicide deaths in 2022 are South Dakotans under the age of 34. So as Jake mentioned earlier, the age group that I work with Lost and Found is from 10 to 34, that youth and young adult kind of age range. And we set that number of 34 specifically to align with the number of suicide deaths among this population. Suicide risk and death impacts all South Dakotans. We obviously know that. You all are probably have been impacted by suicide in some way, shape, or form, but it disproportionately affects youth and young adults, rural and ag communities, and our tribal nations. We also have seen an increase in veteran deaths by suicide in the last couple of years, which is interesting. And then high trauma professions. So think of your first responders, your firefighters, your veterinarians, your EMS support. And then obviously, due to the current legislation and political climate in our state, we have a large number of LGBTQ plus and two-spirit community members who are also experiencing higher rates of suicide and mental illness. So we are doing everything in our power to specifically target these demographics with resources and kind of enveloping them in support because they are the ones that are receiving the least amount of support and they're the most at risk. This is a giant slide of numbers and information. I'm not going to run through it all with you. It really, like I said, just kind of repeats everything that I've gone over, but it does it in two categories. So what is the problem with suicide? What are those numbers? And what's the problem with access to care? The access to care part is kind of the piece that I want to point out today. So all 66 South Dakota counties are considered to have a mental health care professional shortage. What does that mean? That the recommended number of professionals to clients that they are seeing by the CDC, we fall under that number in each of our counties. The South Dakota Board of Regents, so the higher board that governs the educational system for higher ed in South Dakota, they say that the average wait time for counseling services is 3 weeks, with only 2 of 4 institutions in the Board of Technical Education having a counselor on staff. When we look at the student populations that we work with across the across the state that we serve, this is actually pretty accurate. Some campuses are slightly higher than that 3-week mark, and some campuses are slightly lower, but we do only have 2 tech campuses with counselors on staff. One of those campuses that I work very closely with is Western Dakota Tech. And an important thing to note is that we have seen an increase in student deaths by suicide in the Black Hills and Rapid City areas. So we've really been trying to hone in on how do we support students over there, specifically at Western Dakota Tech, since they have a counselor on staff. So how do we support that counselor? The rest you can kind of just read. I did share with Billy and Lisa and Jake before you all hopped on that I'll share this PowerPoint with them, so that way you have access to all of this information, just so that way you don't have to take notes or photos of the slide. You can kind of see it. So in summary, South Dakota does face a tremendous rise in mental health. We need the resources for support. We need to improve the access to prevention and postvention support systems in our state. We actually are one of 2 organizations in the entire state of South Dakota that does provide postvention support. So again, that's afterlife care for families of loss. So we are one of 2 organizations in the entire state that offers that. The increased needs are taxing the resources that we do have. So that's part of the reason that we are facing that professional healthcare shortage. And we're just trying to build capacity to serve the state's most vulnerable population. So again, repeating what I said in the last slide about wanting to focus on those high-risk demographics. So when we look at the work that you all do supporting K-12 students and those in after-school programs, we want to really dial things back and give you all the basics. So ask your students, what is mental health and what do they know about mental health? So what is it to us and how do you explain that to them when you're helping? It is a combination of things. So biological factors, including your genetic makeup and brain chemistry. It's also life experiences such as bullying, trauma, abuse, neglect, chronic stress, grief, and loss. Anything like unemployment, medical issues, financial hardships, And then things like isolation and loneliness. So this is if you're not connecting to your community, if you don't have a family support. When we shut down during COVID, obviously that isolation and loneliness was a major factor. And then other things like stages of life, like transitions, which is why we see middle schoolers and college students really have struggles with suicide and mental health illnesses, challenges, etc., because they're in those like transition areas of time. Also times like exploring your sexuality, becoming a parent, moving to a new location, or finding a job, or retiring. And then lastly, mental health is also made up of your lifestyle choices. So alcohol and drug use usually is working in tandem with your mental illness. Usually you don't just have a substance abuse disorder or challenge, but usually it is in combination with your mental health struggles. Your diet and nutrition is also a major factor. For those that struggle gaining weight or losing weight, a lot of those people face a lot of some mental challenges as well. Disturbed sleep patterns, same kind of thing. Jake and I have talked at length about our sleep patterns because neither of us are very good sleepers. So how does that impact our mental health? What does it look like? And is it part of our mental illness? So when you're talking with your students about mental health, you can share what mental health is using those 4 categories, and then also just share with them that we always live somewhere along the mental health continuum. We all have mental health. We don't all have mental illnesses or mental health struggles. So we're always somewhere on a continuum. So what's that continuum look like? We have 4 zones. We've got the healthy zone, the mild disruption zone, the moderate disruption zone, and the severe disruption zone. Often in medical care, these are known as healthy, ill, they label them with just other like medical terms rather than disruption zones, simply because people don't want to use that language when they're treating people. But I'm not going to go through each of these different zones, but basically it's normal moods to being irritable, experiencing nervousness or anxiety, showing decreased performances in academic work or withdrawing from social situations, and then all the way to the severe zone, which is usually suicidal thoughts, behaviors, experiencing significant changes in behavior and thinking. So that's kind of the continuum that I just referenced. So we're always going to fluctuate somewhere between these 4 zones. I threw in this question here. I don't want you all to necessarily reflect on this question in the moment, but I want you to use this to guide you when working with your students. Ask your students, who do you go to for advice? What qualities do they display that make them a good mentor? Because when you are helping those students, they're probably going to be looking at you as one of these people. And so helping others is a critical part of the mental health care system. It's proven statistically, there's data that shows if you have just one trusted adult in your life, you are more likely to ask for help when you're facing these challenges. And so I always like to pose this question, especially when working with students and young people. Who do you go to for advice and why? Because that is going to help paint a picture to them of who are their support systems and who are their trusted adults. So think about this when you're working with your students, maybe ask them these questions, just in case they ever are facing challenges, you know who to help them, help refer them to. So part of helping others is active listening. I think you all probably know this. I'm not going to go into deep detail here. Active listening obviously is a major way of helping others because people struggling with their mental health oftentimes just want to be heard because they're feeling isolated, they're feeling alone, they're feeling like no one understands them. So listen before you speak, focus on your nonverbals and their nonverbals, avoid multitasking. So put your phones away. I know that's a big one. And try not to assume that someone that you're working with, your mentee or your student or whomever, is ready for change. They might just be struggling and want to sit in that for a while or not be ready to make that change for themselves. There's a behavioral change theory that we often work with in the mental health care field. And so until they're ready to make that change for themselves, you have to kind of just make sure that they're set up for success, because they won't move past that threshold until they have an intrinsic need and desire for that change. Always end the conversation that you have with them on good terms and be respectful and understanding. So again, just all of this is just basic active listening when you're helping people that you're working with. Another way to help is by communicating your understanding through repeating or paraphrasing what they're saying and using affirmations to help them feel that you see them, that you understand them, that you're hearing what they're saying. Always ask open-ended questions. Yes or no questions don't help when you're offering support to especially young people, because if they don't have the language to describe what they're going through and feeling, a yes and no question is not going to get you to the answers that you need in order to refer them out for additional support. Self-disclosure is huge. That's also why I started this presentation, by disclosing why I'm passionate about mental health and suicide prevention. I think it's really important for connection building to put yourself out there. You know, leaders go first. And so if we're the leaders that people are looking to, our students are looking to for support, if we don't put ourselves out there, they're not going to trust us. And therefore, they're not going to put themselves out there and want to answer the questions that we need them to answer. So that way we can provide them the best care. And then offer advice and suggestions, but never provide them a direction. You want them to make the decision on their own. So here is a resource for you. It is a link to a downloadable digital guide that I've created. It's called the Let's Talk About Mental Health Guide. It is a comprehensive guide from the basics of what is mental health all the way to how to have a conversation with someone who is suicidal. And in between, it varies from signs to observe, warning signs, risk factors, those sorts of things, to how to actually go about asking them if they are suicidal or if they are facing challenges. So everything is outlined in that document. I will send this PowerPoint to you all so that way you can download it. It's just a simple scan, comes to your email as a PDF, and then you can share that out to everyone you know if you want. You don't have to be a medical professional to help others get the care and support that they need. This is why it's so important for us to train our advocates and our peer-to-peer mentors, because students just need that additional person or people to support them. You don't have to be a medical professional. Now, with that said, you don't want to provide medical care and medical diagnoses. You just want to make sure that they have the right tools to get the help and support that they need. So how do you do that? We use a framework called the EARS framework, which stands for engage, attend, reinforce, and seek. So you want to engage people by active listening, starting a conversation, asking how they're feeling, or saying, hey, I've observed that you have been isolated the last couple of days when normally you love to hang out with Joe and Katrina and Jake, you know? You've been isolated, you've been on your own. I'm noticing that, so I'm engaging you in a conversation with that. Attend, you want to be attentive to their needs. So what does that look like? Making sure that you're picking up on their nonverbals, and if they look down or start to cry when you bring something up, ask them why. You know, like obviously that's something that's triggering them or causing some emotional distress. So be attentive to them, make sure that they're okay. Attention also means making sure that they don't have the means to harm themselves. So making sure that you're doing so in a safe space that is neutral. Maybe it's not their room or your office or, you know, whatever. Maybe it's a private neutral location that they feel a little bit more safe in. It's not public, but it's something a little bit more neutral. Then reinforce. You want to make sure that you're reinforcing what they're saying by asking those open-ended questions, making sure that you're reaffirming them in what they're saying. And then the last piece is that seeking care and support. So making sure that you're referring out for that support as needed and helping them to seek the care that they need, but only doing so if that's what they want. You never ever want to push them into seeking care unless it's an emergent situation. So going back to those 4 zones, here's where we've got the self-care and social support versus professional care for the healthy zone versus the severe zone. So we're going to start here in the yellow highlighted one. That's the mild disruption zone. So these students are irritable or impatient, experiencing nervousness, sadness, or increased worry, having trouble sleeping, reducing social activity, etc. So what do you do when they're in that stage? Like I said, in the medical care field, sometimes we refer to these different zones as different ways. So we've got healthy, reacting, injured, and ill. So this is where we are determining how to provide care to them. If they're in the healthy and reacting zones, they are going to just need self-care and social support to start. And then if they fluctuate into that injured or ill zone, that's when you're going to refer out and seek that professional care for them versus just supporting them with you or a friend, or making sure that they're getting resources and things like that. Whereas the professional care is, you want to send them to therapy or encourage them to go to therapy. You want them to see a professional. This is where you're no longer at the experience level to provide them the best care. So then what do we do when we're in that reacting stage? So like I just said, we're starting here in that mild disruption zone. So what do? We want to listen. We want to make sure that we're focusing on them and not on ourselves. Sometimes people just need to vent. They're having a rough day. It might not even be a mental health need. Maybe it is, but they just need to vent and you need to listen. Sometimes the best thing we can do for people in a mental health challenge or facing a mental health challenge is to just listen to them and say, you know what, that sucks, and move on. Sometimes they don't even need a resource or support provided. They just need you to validate their feelings. And then normalize the situation. It's so normal to talk about. We still have this stigma associated with mental health for whatever reason. We have this stigma associated with therapy. We have this stigma associated with treatment. But we just need to normalize their conversation. Like we said from the very beginning, all of us have mental health. Not all of us have mental health challenges or illnesses, but we want to normalize that we all should be working to increase positive mental health. So normalize that by just making sure that they know that they're not alone and you won't feel like this forever, that it sucks right now, but it won't always. So now we're going to move into that moderate disruption zone, into the injured care space. So what do we do for those that are injured? We do all of the things that we just listed, but we also remind them, if they have tutoring centers or academic advising. Now, again, I kept this in here because I work with campus students specifically, but for you all with K-12, maybe that is a school counselor or a school advisor. Maybe this is a counseling service because now that we're out of that social support and care zone and we're moving into the professional care zones, maybe that's a counseling service. So that's a therapist for a treatment or substance use, like Keystone. So really looking into those services and making sure that they know where those resources are and how to access them. I gave an example of how to refer to a counseling professional. So if I were working with someone, I might just say, it sounds like you're going through a really hard time right now. Have you ever considered talking to someone? Again, I left in the on-campus piece, but maybe you say, have you ever considered talking to someone like a therapist? I could make the call with you. I keep a list of people in my phone and I have contacts saved for different local agencies. So if I need to ever just call 988 or to call Avera Behavioral or whatever, I can just make that call when I'm with someone in distress. And it helps them to know that I'm going to be on the phone there with them, just so that way they don't feel alone. And then again, when in doubt, always, always, always reach out. You are not alone in this. You are not a medical professional. Maybe you are, but working in this capacity, maybe that's not your role. So always reach out to someone above you or someone that you trust that you can help assist. And then lastly, moving into that severe disruption zone. So these are the people that are ill in the medical terms. So they're showing really high levels of experience mental illness. So what are we doing to help them? We're noticing that they have developed and demonstrated red flags. So these things are rare, but we always want to know these are the things that are like high alert, high alert. Things like we notice scars from self-injury. We notice they're wearing baggier clothes. We notice that they're severely isolating and, maybe they haven't come to school in multiple days. We're noticing things like total isolation where they're no longer hanging out with the same friends that they liked to, or that they aren't engaging in the same activities that they once did. These things are all things to think about and to look at and make sure that you're observing. Another big one is like giving away prized possessions. I think a lot of times with young people specifically, when they die by suicide, they are going to give warnings without actually being a warning. And they're gonna like give, maybe it's their favorite stuffed animal or their favorite sneaker or whatever to a friend. Those are major, major observables. And so then what do? You're not gonna panic, but you're gonna reach out and get in contact with professional as soon as possible. So call 911 or 988 to make sure that you know the local mental health agencies that you might be working with, a police department or a school counselor, anything like that. So just making sure that you get in touch with those people right away. Again, I'm not going to show this, but I am going to provide this to you afterwards, so that way you have access. This video is really, really good at just pointing out how to ask someone point blank if they're having thoughts of suicide. This is probably one of the biggest barriers of access for new care providers and advocates. If you've never asked someone if they're having thoughts of suicide or if they're experiencing severe mental illness, or thoughts of harming themselves, it can be a really, really uncomfortable thing to bring up in conversation, but it has to be done. It is so critical. And so this video just kind of helps you to get comfortable asking that question. I can say I've done it hundreds upon thousands of times in my years of working in education and in the mental health care space. It never gets easier, and I still always kind of have my heart fluttering when I'm about to ask that question. But I can tell you, never once have I asked that question and had a negative outcome. So yes, what do they do if they say yes? Again, don't panic. You never want to make them see the panic. You can be uncomfortable, and you can even share that you're uncomfortable, that this makes you nervous, because that's going to show them that you have empathy and care for them, but that you want to take this seriously and make the right decisions. So then ask follow-up questions at this point. So I'm sorry to hear things have gotten to the point that you think that the only way out is suicide. Do you plan to end your life? Do you have a plan in place? Have you thought about this? Do you have the means to do so? You want to ask those follow-up questions. Again, if yes, explain that you care about them. Make sure that they feel that you are taking that care space, and that you have empathy and concern, and then recommend calling for some support. So if that is a school counselor, if that's 911, if that's 988, whomever that looks like for you all as the after school network. I don't know what your reporting structure looks like, but whatever that might look like for you, let's try to make sure that we get them that support. Okay, so thoughts of suicide here, what to do, again, kind of just, the reporting structure. So if you know that someone has a plan, you obviously want to take action right away. So this can be calling 988 or 911. If it's an emergent situation, these are the two numbers that you want to call. You don't want to just jump right into a therapy or a treatment plan. You want to call and get emergency support there right at the moment. Do not promise to keep secrets. Sadly, we are a profession that does require certain reporting. And so especially when working with youth, if they are considering harm, this is something that you have to report to other people to get support. So don't tell them that like this is something that you can keep between them. You can say, I want to cherish this. I want to hold on to it. I value that you came to me as the person that you trust to share this information with. However, I have to also help you in the best way by helping get you to the appropriate care. So don't promise to make secrets or to keep secrets. And then always just remember that you're not a counselor, you're not a medical professional, so you're not responsible for that person's mental health. You are simply responsible for advocating for them and responsible for getting them the care that they need if they are willing and able to do so. So talking about suicide, obviously this is tough. We want to talk about the feelings of mental health though. So this might be a little awkward again. That's why I gave you that video of how to talk about it, how to have the conversation. It's also okay to not have answers and solutions. It's okay to just simply listen and say, again, that sucks, and validate their feelings. They're going to be most likely very relieved to just get this feeling and this thought off of their chest. They want to just share it with someone because they've been feeling this for a while. They're holding on to it and it's eating them alive. And that's part of why when suicide happens, is they just get to this point of it's eating me alive and I can't do it anymore. And they, have that snap moment of it's all too much. You don't have to understand what they're going through. Honestly, most of the time, I don't understand what someone is going through. I do have lived experiences with mental illness, and I, do suffer from PTSD, anxiety, depression, but often I don't experience everything. Jake, I don't experience everything that he's going through. Lisa, I don't experience everything you're going through. Riley, I don't experience everything you're going through. So how can I possibly understand if I've not lived in your shoes? So it's okay to not understand. Again, this is where that validation of feelings comes into place. Always thank the person for sharing because they trust you, they're advocating for themselves, you're advocating for them, and that is the biggest piece of support for mental health, is that advocacy component. And then always refer up as needed. Oh, why is my screen not moving forward? There we go. So let's kind of move into some resources. So obviously, where are we pointing people to when we are referring out? The Helpline Center here in South Dakota, and most states have a Helpline Center. So always refer to them if they just need like simple supports. The 988 line is obviously for emergent things, but they also don't respond just to crisis calls. They also can help talk you through what to do, how to refer out, etc. Those dispatchers are trained, and so they'll sit with you on the phone and talk you through anything that you need. The We Are Native My Mind is a Native specific, so American Indian and Indigenous folks. This is specifically targeting them in how to talk about suicide. It just offers them cultural language that is more inclusive for them. Same thing with the best Native American therapists and psychologists. So that came from Psychology Today, which is one of my favorite resources. I have it bookmarked on my computer. I use it probably once a day for looking up different things. There is a giant list of mental health resources at SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health and Suicide Association. Then we have, again, more resources for Indigenous populations, and then counseling centers, clinical mental health centers, anything like Avera or Sanford or just a therapist office. Any of those are great resources to send people to. Furthering that, we've got specific mental health things. So Mental Health America, I'm actually doing a campaign right now for Mental Health Awareness Month that I'm using content that, not content, but like resources from Mental Health America. So that is coming out through our social media channels this month. So I use them pretty regularly. NAMI, mentalhealth.gov, which is similar to the CDC. It's a government and federal focused mental health organization. So all things credible, all things sourced and cited, very, very important, helpful resources. National Institute of Mental Health. I don't use this one as much, but again, it's very credible. It is another government site. And then again, SAMHSA. Specifically for suicide prevention, we've got the crisis text line, which you can access on your phone. It's really easy. the South Dakota Suicide Prevention website. This actually is the reporting organization directly from South Dakota Department of Health. So all of that information and statistics that is collected from the Department of Health is then sent to South Dakota Suicide Prevention to market that and share out resources. We've got Helpline Center again, that's the 211 number as well as the 988 number. We've got the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which offers a lot of research and data. They also offer peer support groups for survivors, for men, for women, for youth, for college students. They have a lot of different demographic specific peer groups. And then lastly, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center and Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is the leading organization for queer resources. They do a national suicide statistical analysis to report just queer, LGBTQ, Two-Spirit, etc. Folks, those statistics and population data. So we really use them a lot as well. That is what I've got for you. I just know I rattled off a ton of resources and information, but really I just wanted to arm you all with the ability to support your students in the best way possible, which is why it was more heavy on the resources and statistics than the how to actually talk about things. I want to make sure that you all are ready to refer out as needed. If you need additional support, have additional questions, comments, concerns, I guess the floor is yours. I think we're turning off the recording for questions. So